Well, earlier this month, the federal budget tabled a framework for a Canadian dollar-backed stablecoin. Our next guest says that with proper regulation, this new digital currency would ensure the Canadian dollar remains relevant on the global stage while protecting its sovereignty. Joining us now to share his thoughts on the new framework and what is still needed for Canadian stablecoin regulation is Didier Lavallée, CEO of Tetra Digital Group. Didier, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
What do you like about what we saw in this framework that is released, and what do you think still needs to be changed?
I think there's a lot of things to like about what was released. Specifically, I would say the first one would be the speed at which they released something. So really, a great amount of respect for Minister Champagne's office and essentially our Premier Carney for getting their act together and getting something out quickly. So that would certainly be the first one. Now, the second piece I would say is around what's missing. I mean, we have a construct. It's a great starting point. I think there needs to be further alignment and further definition as to what a stablecoin will actually do for Canadians and how that needs to be properly regulated, specifically around the jurisdictional challenges, whether it's provincial regulation or federal regulation.
And what would you like to see it do? What do you think we should do provincially or federally at that level?
I think the budget did a really great job and the draft legislation highlighting that stablecoins should be payment tools and they should be regulated as such. Yet we still have a provincial construct around making them a security. So I strongly believe the ideal scenario is stablecoins should be utilized as payments. They should be federally regulated. And the draft legislation gets us partly there.
Do you see provinces saying yes to that?
Great question. I mean, I would argue that likely not, because we saw a prospectus this week being issued to a Canadian company via Ontario. So, with that signal, I think the provinces are sending an important message that they still believe that jurisdictions should be at the provincial level, at least until there is a federal framework into law. Just a reminder, we're still very much at the draft stage right now.
And now, what do we need one for? What do we need a stablecoin for? A lot of people, I think, are still trying to figure out the whole cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Ethereum, now the stablecoins. What do we need one for, do you think?
Yeah, so stablecoins are really just a representation of a Canadian dollar. It's a digital representation. It also makes it transacting that Canadian dollar internationally and locally a lot faster and quicker and cheaper. And then there's a programmatic aspect of being able to transact a digital dollar. So from a treasury management perspective, from a settlement perspective, from a counterparty risk perspective, there's a lot of benefits. I think most Canadians trust their financial institutions and therefore they trust essentially the banking rails. But Canada has been behind on a lot of different frameworks that have been globally adopted, including open banking, which we saw some strong signals on the budget, and real-time rails, which we still don't have. We're the only G7 country not to have. Stablecoin is an extension of all these great innovations in the financial sector. And we see a lot of benefits to both ourselves, to Canadians, and also to businesses that are transacting both domestically and abroad.
And why peg it to the Canadian dollar? Why not just go with the American?
Also a great question. So the problem with when you utilize a US dollar stablecoin is essentially you're buying US treasuries. And that's a problem for Canadians because you're supporting the US economy. Now, as Canadians or proud Canadians, there's a sovereignty aspect here. And we should want to utilize the Canadian dollar for our transactional businesses, both domestically and abroad. So, the concept of a Canadian dollar and why it matters is because we're supporting Canadian treasuries, the Canadian economy, as opposed to supporting somebody else's currency.
And there'd be no problems using it elsewhere?
Yeah, so that's part of the construct and part of what needs to happen, where players like Tetra and the marketplace are working really hard to ensure that there's capacity to transact that internationally as well. We've announced a couple of high-profile partners as part of our original announcement, including players like Wealthsimple, Purpose, ATB Financial, National Bank, and Shopify. And we're also working actively with other global partnerships where the Canadian dollar is an important piece of their transactional system, or creating, a G7 basket for digital asset currencies. And our capacity at Tetra to essentially seed that liquidity will be incredibly important for that success.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Didier, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Didier Lavallée is the CEO of Tetra Digital Group.